Psalm 145, I will preserve your memory forever. When I cry, my voice trembles with fear. When I call, it cracks with anger. How can I greet the dawn with song when darkness eclipses the rising sun? To whom shall I turn when the clouds of the present eclipse the rays of tomorrow? Turn to me, to yesterday, that I may be consoled by its memories. Were not the sea split asunder? Did we not once walk together through the waters to the dry side? Did we not bless the bread that came forth from heavens? Did your voice not reach my ears and direct my wanderings? The waters, the lightning, the thunder remind me of yesterday's triumphs. Let the past offer proof of tomorrow. Let it be my comforter and guarantor. I have been here before, known the fright, and found your companionship. I enter the sanctuary again to await the echo of your promise.
Thank you, Rabbi Paley, for that moving introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our annual Yom HaShoah Commemoration. I'm Mary Pat Higgins, the President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. It is truly an honor to be here with each of you tonight to mark this important day of remembrance. Thank you, Rabbi Paley and Temple Shalom, for generously hosting us in your sanctuary this evening. It's a pleasure to be able to gather together again this year, and especially sweet to see survivors here tonight with so many friends and community members. Tonight, we mourn the loss of 6 million Jews and honor the incredible survivors in our community. Having lived through the horrors of the Holocaust, they are beacons of hope and resilience. Before we proceed, I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the survivors in our community whom we have lost over the past year. Jack Belzaki Bell, Ted Bernstein, Rosa Hirsch Bloom, Ida Gertschenstein, Tibor Greenberger, Ralph Hockley, Doris Markowitz, Friedel Hess Marks, Dr. Liliane Grossinger-Richmond, and Nikolai Safir. May their memory be for a blessing. Our 2024 Yom HaShoah Commemoration takes place during a critical and tumultuous time in history. As the war between Hamas and Israel continues, there are ongoing protests not just around the world, but also here in North Texas. We stand with Israel and against anti-Semitism in all its forms. Surging anti-Semitism should be a clarion call for all of us. As the world's oldest hatred, the explosion in America is symptomatic of the erosion of pluralism and points toward increased prejudice and hatred in our society. The best defense against the rising tide of hatred is education. We are resolute in our efforts to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. History that is not remembered is more likely to be repeated. We each carry a responsibility to ensure that the lives cut short by the Holocaust and the stories that survive are never lost. Today, Holocaust distortion and denial are tolerated more than ever. We have a duty to pass down survivor testimonies to future generations with the goal to remember the Holocaust and combat the spread of anti-Semitism. To our survivors, please know we do not take this responsibility lightly. Tonight, we will hear the stories of local survivors that endured the Holocaust in Hungary, which began 80 years ago on March 19, 1944, when Nazi Germany invaded Hungary. Although this invasion occurred near the end of the war, the extermination of the Jewish population was swift and cruel. Our readers tonight are members of the Junior Board, which has made up of high school students who are dedicated to sharing the museum's mission with the broader community. We appreciate their commitment to ensuring that the Holocaust is remembered generation over generation. We are thankful for our survivors and their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and generations to come who continue to share their experiences. As part of this commitment to generational remembrance, the museum has introduced a new Generations Council, led by co-chairs Paula Romberg and Phil Globin, to spearhead this charge. If you are a second or third generation survivor, please consider joining our Generations Council to connect with other descendants of survivors who help the museum continue its mission of remembrance. And now it's my honor to ask Phil to join me in lighting a candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews martyred in the Holocaust. I would now like to welcome Museum Junior Board member Amruthi Jayanthi.
On March 19, 1944, Nazi Germany invaded Hungary. The invasion marked the culmination of several years of uneasy relations between the two countries. In the wake of the invasion, almost 500,000 Hungarian Jews perished between May and July of 1944. Jews had lived in Hungary for more than 1,000 years, with some reports dating the population back to Roman times. By the turn of the 20th century, Austria-Hungary had a large Jewish population, 2 million across the empire. Jews accounted for 25% of Budapest's population alone. They had enjoyed relatively equal treatment and freedom of trade following the collapse of the absolutist government in the 1860s. But with the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after World War I, Hungary was forced to cede 2/3 of its land and people to neighboring nations. This wounded Hungarian pride deeply, setting the stage for the decades that followed. Many Hungarians blamed the Jews for the empire's collapse and the country's losses. In 1919, a communist coup was led by Béla Kun, a Hungarian Jewish communist. It was accompanied by a Red Terror. Kun's government lasted only 4 months and was overthrown. It was followed by almost 2 years of a brutal counter-revolution and a White Terror. In both instances, Hungarian Jews were caught in the crossfire. The counter-revolutionary forces were led by Miklos Horthy, a former Austro-Hungarian admiral who rose to power in the wake of the successful counter-revolution. Beyond this conflict, the interwar period in Hungary was marked by the persistence of anti-Semitism. In 1920, Hungary passed the first Jewish law in post-World War I Europe, limiting Jewish enrollment in higher education to 6% to any student body. Survivor Dr. Andras Lako remembered that his father was affected by this law. He had aspired to be a doctor, but because of racial laws in Hungary that restricted the entry of Jews into medical school, he really couldn't make it, and he eventually entered his father's profession as a grocery store owner. Starting in 1938, following the Anschluss, which demonstrated to Horthy the strength of his Nazi allies and the unwillingness of European nations to stop their anti-Semitic actions, he began to pass anti-Jewish legislation. Between 1938 and 1941, Hungarian Jews lost the ability to own or run businesses, to vote, to marry non-Jews, or to own land. With the outbreak of World War II, Horthy, fearful of the Soviets, remained aligned with Germany. Many Jewish men of military age were conscripted to serve in the Hungarian army in foes' labor battalions. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany and its allies invaded the Soviet Union under a plan called Operation Barbarossa. Hungary was late in joining the invasion and did not participate with its full military. Still, there were Hungarian units that served in the east. Survivor Les Mittelman was conscripted and shipped to the Eastern Front. His forced labor battalion worked for the Germans. He noted, "Those Germans used us for putting down mines. They signed up an area where we had to put mines there. The first day, 2 boys blew up on that minefield. They didn't do it right and stepped on the mine." Survivor Dr. Zuzana Oshvath recounted that her father was also conscripted. They were walking 20 miles a day. They had no food, they had no clothing, their feet were worn. They were killed by the thousands on the highway as they were walking. These Hungarian slave laborers had the worst statistics of survivor. Virtually all of them were killed. As the war progressed, Horthy came under increasing pressure from Adolf Hitler to round up Hungary's Jewish population and deport them. Although Horthy had enacted harsh anti-Jewish restrictions, for the most part, Hungary's Jews were not yet subjected to physical harm. By 1944, Horthy knew the war was likely lost. He secretly began negotiations with the Soviet Union, believing they would be on the victorious side. Aware of this, and earlier attempts to negotiate with the Americans and British, Hitler invaded Hungary on March 19, 1944. Life for Jews in Hungary changed overnight. Domé Stoye, a Hungarian soldier sympathetic to the Nazi regime, was installed as prime minister. Horthy lost much, but not all his power. The new leaders quickly legalized the malicious anti-Semitic rightist Arrow Cross Party, which sought to incarcerate and later murder the Jewish population. Zuzana Oshvath remembered the day of invasion in Budapest clearly, even at 10 years old. It was a Sunday morning, and I went to my piano lesson, and my piano teacher said, "Go home, just go home immediately. My mother will take you home. You are not supposed to be in the street." When she arrived home, her family did not believe her at first when she said that the Germans had invaded. They considered going into hiding, but Zuzana knew they would be found eventually if they attempted to run. The family gathered a small amount of cyanide in case they were arrested. They had heard stories of the gas chambers from Polish and Czech refugees and knew they did not want to share this fate. Later, Zuzana learned that Jews attempting to leave the country were stopped at the train station and sent away immediately. They were some of the first Hungarian Jews to perish at Auschwitz. Events progressed rapidly. On April 5, 1944, under German guidance, Hungarian authorities required all Jews to wear a yellow star so they could be easily recognized. Survivor Magda Mittelman was 20 years old at this time and lived in Szolnok, Hungary. She recounted, "One day we get the yellow stars. We had to wear the yellow stars so we could go out on the streets. Everybody had to make them themselves. My mother did it, and I put it on my coat and my dress also." Les Mittelman was stationed with his labor battalion in Szolnok and met Magda for the first time. He recounted sneaking out of his barracks to go see her when he could. Quickly, conditions worsened again. All Hungarian Jews, except those in Budapest, had to report to ghettos, which, depending on where you lived, could be a neighborhood or simply a house. For Magda, it was just a school building in Szolnok. She said, "And then one nice day came 2 policemen, and they told me, 'You have to pick up all your things, not too many things, because you are going to the ghetto.' So we packed up some bed stuff, a pillow and a comforter, and a little buggy, and we just pulled it in the ghetto. They were given rations and boarded up in the building, unable to leave." Between June and November, Jews in Budapest were confined to yellow star houses around the city. Survivor Andras Slako remembered this. He said, "Grade 2, I never started, because laws against Jews became very severe, and there were curfews, and we had to live in special Jewish houses. We had to move together with a large group of relatives, 19 of us, being in the equivalent of a 3-bedroom apartment." Zuzana Oshvath also recounted the yellow star houses. She noted, "In this house, there were a whole society of children and adults, both waiting for the end of the war and listening to the news all the time. And on one hand, we were incredibly aware of every little detail of what happens with the war, and on the other hand, we knew that Jews were being taken away." She remembers spending the early days playing the piano, putting on theatrical productions with the other children, and continuing with her cultural life despite the conditions outside. I now light a candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust.
I would now like to welcome back the Temple Shalom Choir with Eli, Eli. We will continue with Junior Board Member Noah Brown.
The first transports to Auschwitz began on May 15th, 1944, and continued through July 9th, 1944, under the direction of Adolf Eichmann. After several weeks in the Solnach ghetto, Magda Mittelman and her family were told it was to be liquidated and its inhabitants deported to Auschwitz. Their Gentile neighbors peered out at them as they walked out of the neighborhood. Magda said, "The Germans were pushing us up on the wagon, about 100 people in this wagon. We had been on the train for 3 days when we saw a chimney. 2 big chimneys in the distance, and they were burning. The flame was high up on the sky." Magda's mother said, "I don't know where we're going, but maybe we're going right in the flame." Magda recalled, "I don't know why, but I didn't feel anything. I saw the flame, I didn't feel anything. And then we went closer to the place. Then we smelled the flesh, the burning flesh. Finally, the train pulled in and stopped. There was a hill of baby shoes, and right beside this, there was another hill with eyeglasses. I saw for the first time Dr. Mengele. He was selecting. He selected out my cousin first, and she went. A couple weeks later, her sister was selected as well. Lastly, she said, my mother was selected, and I tried to run after her. The Blockaltesta, who was responsible for everybody, she was running after me, and she was trying to quiet me down. And she said, "Don't worry about your mother." She said she was taking her own mother to the gas chamber. Magda, now all alone, was moved to Bergen-Belsen because the Soviet army was getting close to Auschwitz. In total, about 430,000 Jews were deported across Hungary to Auschwitz between May and July 1944. Most were gassed upon arrival. Horthy ordered the deportations to stop in mid-July, partly in response to Allied pressure. By this time, Budapest had the only remaining Jewish community in Hungary. On July 2nd, 1944, American bombers laid waste to sections of German-occupied Budapest, destroying critical storage and fuel tanks. Zsuzsanna Ashvath recalled this saying, "Then the decree came that all Jews of Budapest must close their blinds and wait for further orders." That was July 2nd, 1944. In the meantime, D-Day had taken place the month before, and we were celebrating. There was a horrible bombardment over Budapest, and we knew nothing. All the railroads were bombed down to nothing. In a twist of fate, Andras Lako contracted the scarlet fever and was quarantined with the Red Cross, safe from harm due to the infectious nature of his illness. He noted, when the Hungarian fascists came to get me, everybody lined up and get ready to go to the ghetto, that they just barely opened my door. But they wouldn't even want to come in because I had a contagious disease. So instead of being taken to the ghetto, I eventually was treated at a military hospital where I was put together with soldiers who were being treated very well. In fall 1944, Soviet forces crossed the Hungarian border. Horthy attempted to negotiate peace with the Allies yet again. In October, the Nazis replaced Horthy with a government strongly favorable to Germany that was dominated by the Arrow Cross, which directed a reign of terror at the Jews of Budapest. In late November, the Arrow Cross ordered the remaining Jews of Budapest into a ghetto, which, covering 0.1 square miles, held nearly 70,000 people. The Arrow Cross ordered the remaining Jews of Budapest. The Arrow Cross also murdered as many as 20,000 Jews in Budapest by shooting them into the Danube River. Also, they marched about 70,000 Jews on death marches towards Germany to be used as slaves for the Reich. By December, Soviet and Romanian troops had encircled the city. What followed was a 50-day siege of Budapest. Survivor Tibor Grunberger was a Czech refugee living in Budapest with his two brothers. He recounted his experience in the ghetto and his escape. "I knew this was the death. This is going to be the end of us. There's nothing. There's no food. There was nothing. So I'm going down. It was kind of an apartment building, and I found out there is this one guy who was driving a hearse, taking the dead out of the ghetto. The last thing I still had on was a watch that I got from my father. We were there already 4 days with nothing to eat. And I say to him, 'All I have is just one beautiful watch. I'll give it to you. Will you please help us get out of here?' He says, 'Okay now, be ready tonight.' So we escaped the ghetto in a hearse. With dead people above us, we were underneath. After escaping, Tibor and his brothers hid in the cellar of a hotel with others close to starvation. While hiding, Tibor witnessed Arrow Cross shootings of Jews into the Danube River. He recounted they were killing the Jews almost every night. If they caught any Jews in those days, there was no more going to Auschwitz or Birkenau or to any place like that because the city was surrounded. Whoever they caught didn't have the papers and all that. They would line them up on the Danube and then machine gun them down. I will never forget, once I was liberated, I went out there. I saw those bloated, poor people on the Danube, dead people floating on the water. Some were taken downstream, some were still there on the side. Zsuzsanna Ashvath also witnessed the violence. After securing false papers and escaping the ghetto, she walked through the city with her brother Ivan. It snowed, and by the time it came down, it was black mud. We walked in blood. We walked in all kinds of people. And I stepped in something, and I said, "What was that?" Yvonne looked at it and said, "Brains." We walked, and there are screaming people, killed in the streets. Babies shot. We had wigs on, so nobody shot us. Shoshana saw an elderly woman crawling on all fours just to be shot by a young teenage soldier. During the last months of 1944, more than 30,000 civilians died from starvation, military action, or mass execution. I will now light a candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust.
I'd like to welcome back Temple Shalom Choir with Yesh Kokhavim.
There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light. Long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. יש כוכבים של רמגי הרצה, רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו בינם. יש אנשים שסביב זכרם מאיר, כאשר הם עצמם אינם עוד בתוכנו. אורות אלה המבהיקים בחשכת הליל, הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. הם שמראים לאדם את הדרך, את הדרך. We live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember as we live our days. These are the ways we remember. We remember. We remember. We remember.
We will continue with Museum Junior Board Member Sadie Beck.
In January 1945, the remnants of the Hungarian army were losing the war on the Eastern Front. so they retreated to Poland. Les Middleman was still a member of the Hungarian Force Labor Battalion. While traveling along the Polish border, his battalion's wagon broke down, and the leader told Les to stay back with 2 other men to fix it. Knowing this was their only chance to escape, the 3 of them ran into a nearby forest. There, they came across a group of rebels, partisans, living in the woods, and they joined the resistance, sabotaging German equipment and transportation to buy time for the Soviet Union to liberate Poland. They eventually made their way to Warsaw. Les said, "Warsaw was under German occupation. The Germans were there. The ghetto was burned already. The Russians were getting close to the river on the other side of Wisła, the river which cut Warsaw in half. We were planning on staying on the German side to do anything we can to destroy things there. We were 18 people. On the 3rd day, we were sitting on top of the storage place, and the Germans were patrolling, and they saw us up there on the hill, and they started shooting at us. I was with the machine gun, and my friend Sam, he was with the bullet belt. 1 minute, I turned to Sam and say, "I don't have any supply. I'm stuck. What are you doing?" I was looking at Sam. Sam had no head. They were shooting us with the machine guns, and they threw some kind of grenade. Les and the remaining men attempted to retreat to join the rest of their group, but the Germans used parachute flares to light up the battlefield. He said, "They picked us up with the light, and they started to shoot. I get hit. They hit me in my leg, a couple of places. My legs get hit, and I couldn't stand up. The biggest wound was my knee. I had to tear my shirt and try to clean and bind it, but I couldn't move. I tried crawling from there, and again, the candles went up in the air. They saw me there, and I get hit a second time, and they shoot me that time in my arm, my head, and in my back. So I was there. I couldn't move. I was bleeding there and left there unconscious. I woke up a couple of hours later. Les was carried away by 2 Polish men. He said, "They carried me to the first aid place. The 2 boys who are carrying the stretcher, they know me because they were a part of our partisan group, but the Germans caught them. One of them tells me in my ear, 'Don't worry, we're not going to tell them who you are.'" Les had 13 bullet wounds throughout his body. He was taken to a field hospital where a doctor performed surgery. The doctor put him in a separate room and quarantined him away from German patients while Les slowly healed. Weeks later, the doctor told him to crawl out the window and escape, as the hospital unit was being recalled to Germany. Les escaped to see Soviet troops arriving in Warsaw. Back in Budapest, Hungary signed an armistice with the Soviet Union in January 1945, knowing the city was lost. Soviet forces liberated the last sections of the city in February. Zuzana Osvoth remembers that moment clearly. "Oh, we were crying. Many people kissed their hands and kissed feet. The street was unbelievable. I mean, everything was in ruins. Everything. I mean, horses and people dead, and carriages and carts collapsed, and houses, and so on. After we came up from the shelters, on the first street corner, 3 Russians stood. We threw away our yellow stars as we came from the shelters. They couldn't care less whether we were Jews or not. Andras Lako was still in the hospital, but the staff fled as the tanks rolled in. He recalled, the Russians were banging on the door to Budapest, and they were already occupying parts of the city. The hospital ran out of food, and the doctors left. It was total chaos. There was nothing left over there, and there were 2 kids who suggested that if we have friends or relatives in the area, we should go to them. That was one of the coldest winters in memory, and I had a pair of shoes with holes in them, and I had very poor clothing. But still, we got on the street in what's equivalent to -10 Fahrenheit and start walking towards these kids' friends. In addition to the scarlet fever, which I had just about beat by that time, I developed a very bad case of dysentery. Andras was reunited with his parents as the war ended in Hungary. He remembered this time as one of starvation. There was hardly any food. People were cutting up dead horses in the street to get any food, and we were trading pieces of clothing with people for some food. My father and I were actually rummaging the bombed-out houses for a can of this or a can of that, and we occasionally found something. But things got better in a month or 2. Schools reopened in March 1945, and he was finally able to start second grade. British soldiers liberated Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945, freeing Magda Middleman. She was one of 60,000 ill and famished prisoners remaining in the camp. After she regained her health, she made the trek back to Hungary to look for family members that might still be alive. She also hoped she would find Les along the way. She left a trail of notes and messages for him, and they finally reunited on December 19, 1945. Magda and Les were married the next day. More than a third of the Jews murdered in Auschwitz came from Hungary. Some 160,000 Jews, less than one-third of those who had lived within Hungary in March 1944, survived the Holocaust. For the Jews of Hungary who had survived, the war itself was over. But the memories and images of the past few years stayed with them for the rest of their lives. In recalling the impact of the events, Zsuzsanna Osvoth noted, "It shows that 6 million people's flesh can be turned into ashes at a time of science and morality and intelligence and fantasy and art. In a way, this tells us something about us as human beings. 1/3 of the world's Jews are gone forever, and much of their culture is gone and never any more recoverable." Years after the Holocaust, when Les Middleman began to share his story, he often noted, "If you think something like the Holocaust could never happen again, you're wrong. If you think it can't happen here in the United States, you're very wrong. And if you think it can only happen to the Jewish people, you're dead wrong." Today, the Holocaust is memorialized around the world through monuments, museums, and days of remembrance. This year, we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the deportations of Hungarian Jewry, and we remember the innocent lives lost. I now light a candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust.
At this time, I invite all who are able to please rise. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat kanfei hashechina, Ihim kedoshim utorim, Kezohar harakia, Mazehirim, Et nishmot achenu, Ve'achyoteinu, Shenehargu, Veshenishchatu, Veshinisrefu begetahot, Uvemachanot ha'ashmada, Ba'avur shanu, Nodarim lekayam et zichram, Ledor vador ulenetzach netzachim. Baal harachamim yastirem, Beseter kenafav leolamim, Vitror bitror hachayim et nishmaoteihem, Adonai hu nachalatam, V'yanuchu b'shalom, Al mishkavam v'nomar Amen. Exalted, compassionate God, Grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure. To the souls of all of our brethren, men, women, and children of the house of Israel, who were slaughtered and burned in the ghettos and concentration camps. May their memory endure, inspiring faith and loyalty in all our lives. May their souls thus be bound up in the bond of life, and may they rest in peace. And let us say together, Amen. In the words of Kaddish, we pray together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon u'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, bagala u'bizman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shalama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Please be seated. At this time, I'd like to call on Lee Michaels to come forward.
Good evening. I'm Lee Michaels, and I am honored to serve as the chair of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. On behalf of the board and staff of the museum, I want to thank everyone who participated in our annual ceremony of remembrance. This is always an exceptionally meaningful program, and we are so honored that you spent your evening with us. I would like to conclude tonight, as Mary Pat began, with gratitude. Thank you to Rabbi Paley and Temple Shalom for being such wonderful hosts. To our junior board members, Umritha J. Unthi, Noah Brown, and Sadie Beck for sharing the stories of local survivors with us. To Mandy Monreal and the Temple Shalom Choir for the beautiful music. To the Temple Shalom Brotherhood for volunteering tonight. And to everyone who so generously supported the commemoration with poignant tributes in the program book. 40 years ago, a group of Holocaust survivors who had settled in Dallas came together with an extraordinary vision to create a center that would educate the Dallas community about the devastating horrors of the Holocaust and provide a place of remembrance for those murdered. The Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, as it stands today, would not exist without the passion, wisdom, and dedication of those individuals. To those here tonight and those no longer with us, we thank you. And I would like to add, it is my honor that I am involved with this museum, and it is my passion to continue to carry your legacy. Tonight you heard the story of just a few survivors in one region during 1 year of the war. There are so many more of these stories that need telling, of the millions of victims that lost their homes, their families, or their lives. What we listened to tonight is just one part of what guests learn at the museum every day, almost 80 years after the end of the Holocaust. As Mary Pat noted at the beginning of the evening, we are living in turbulent and uncertain times, but we can all take part in the museum's mission to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference. We can all be upstanders. I'd like to now light our last memorial candle for the evening. I light this candle in memory of 1 million of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust.
This time I'd like to invite all who are able to please rise one more time. Thank you all for joining tonight. I hope you all have a good night. Thank you so much for being here. Drive safely. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.